Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So there were a lot of things that I said that I'd never do when I first started growing cut flowers. For instance, I told myself that I'd never grow daffodils because I didn't like that traditional school bus yellow sort of flower. Ironically, we now grow dozens of different daffodil varieties and I still can't get enough of this spring flower. Now, when we started selling flowers, I was very set in the fact that we'd never be a you-pick flower farm. After all, the garden, it's always been my space, and I wasn't thrilled about the idea of inviting strangers in here. And when I thought about you-pick flower gardens, my mind often wandered to the worst. You know, I worried about visitors trampling over my flower rows or destroying plants, by cutting too far down. And I really wondered if my garden could survive an entire season if I were to invite guests into it. But this year, I had a change of heart. You see, for the past couple of years, we've been working hard to have a full 4 seasons of product offerings. Now, if you watch us on Instagram or Facebook, then you know that right now we are deep in fall mode. We are busy keeping our fall farm stand stocked with lots of varieties of pumpkins, plenty of potted mums, and all the fall decor stuff. And in just a few months, we switch to a very hectic winter season where we create fresh evergreen porch pots and wreath kits for our customers. And then immediately following that, we dive right into tulip season where we try our best to force tulip bulbs so that our customers can celebrate Valentine's Day and Easter and Mother's Day with fresh, locally grown tulips. It's a lot. And I knew that this year I didn't want to push through an overwhelmingly busy summer season on top of all of that. Now, don't get me wrong, I love our summer garden and I love creating beautiful bouquets, but I also knew that if I didn't find some way to reduce our workload just a little bit, then I was setting myself up for some severe burnout. And so opening our summer garden up as a you-pick garden was really my solution to reducing my labor this season. Now, spoiler alert, opening up as a you-pick flower garden was a huge win for us. And in this video, I really want to break down our experience operating as a you-pick flower farm. I want to share what went well, what we'd change, and just share my overall first impression of how it went. So if you're ready, let's go. Before we start, I do want to emphasize in this video that I'm simply sharing my experience. Inevitably, when the topic of you-pick comes up, I'm often asked about insurance and/or liability, and really, those are all things that you should definitely speak with a professional about. So now that we have that out of the way, let's start with a little rundown of how our you-pick actually works. My biggest concern with opening our garden was that I wanted to maintain some sense of control. I didn't want people coming and going through our field at all hours of the day whenever they pleased. And I wanted to make sure that if I happened to have a large week with either our wholesale orders or subscription customers, that I could limit the number of you-pickers that we actually allowed in the flower field. And so we required that all of our visitors purchase in advance a ticket for one of our you-pick events. We sold the tickets, right through our online shop, and this allowed us to select the dates that we would allow visitors to come visit our farm. I wanted to know when people were actually coming out, and I didn't want to be caught off guard by surprise visits. Now, pre-selling tickets, besides just allowing us to control the days that we would welcome guests to our farm, it also allowed us to control the time of day that visitors could actually pick flowers. I mean, if you've ever picked flowers during the heat of the afternoon, then you likely know how easily flowers can wilt in the hot sun. I really wanted to avoid this so that our customers didn't leave our farm with a wilted jar of flowers. And so we scheduled our you-picks to start later in the afternoon on the weekdays and on the early mornings in the weekends. The tickets, they were also a great way to manage expectations with our customers. I was very clear on our website, letting our customers know that what they could expect. I told guests things like how our flowers are in an open field, and they may want to pack things like sunscreen, a hat, or even a water bottle. I also let them know that this was our private residence and that we didn't allow our guests to bring their pets with them. Any information that I could give to potential visitors so that they knew exactly what they were signing up for, and so there were no surprises on the day of the you-pick, that was important to me. Also, one more thing that we could control with the pre-purchased tickets was the number of guests allowed at each you-pick event. Again, my thought process was focused on giving our customers the best experience possible, so they not only want to come back for another visit, but so that they'd want to tell all their family and friends about us. Selling tickets beforehand meant that I could limit our U-Pick events to a maximum of 15 to 20 guests at a time so that our flower field didn't feel overly crowded. I wanted people to be able to move freely around and not feel like they were picking flowers on top of one another. Now, if you have a larger space, you could certainly host bigger events, and the same process could work even with a smaller garden. Now, the tickets worked great for us for all the reasons that I just mentioned. Now, what I hadn't anticipated is how much our customers appreciated the pre-purchase tickets as well. Several of them, in fact, actually commented on how much they enjoyed coming to our event and not having to worry about checking out at the end. They could simply show up, enjoy the garden, and leave once they picked their arrangement. They didn't have to bring anything additional with them, like a purse or a wallet, and so it just made everything easier for everyone. So what exactly did our customers receive with the purchase of their ticket? Well, for starters, it gave them access to our garden. Our U-Picks ran for 2 hours, and during that time saw our guests they could come and go as they pleased. You know, they didn't have to stay for the whole time, obviously, and most guests, they did finish in about an hour. Now, some guests, they were part of a larger group and they did stay for a bit longer and visited with one another afterwards, but everybody, they did respect our 2-hour time limit. And honestly, it never felt like anyone was rushed. That 2-hour time window was more than enough time. Our guests, they also received a large pint-sized mason jar that they did get to take home with them. And that mason jar was their measuring stick for how many flowers that they got to cut. Now, I'll show you a clip of some of our jars. Realize that I never like to miss a branding opportunity, so we did tie these simple tags with our logo on them, just with some twine that we picked up at the craft store. Now, as I said, we use the jar method, but there's a lot of ways that you could charge for a U-Pick event. I've certainly seen a lot of farms that charge per stem, and I think that can be a great system. Personally, I hate counting stems. Even when I'm making bouquets for our subscription customers or when I'm bunching flowers for our wholesale clients, I just can't stand counting stems for some reason, so I wanted to avoid making our guests count stems. So our rule for our U-Pickers was simple. If it fit in the jar, it was theirs for the taking. Some of our guests, they certainly did load their jars to the brim, you know, fitting lots and lots of flowers inside, while others took a more simple approach, filling their jars a bit more loosely. Either way, it seemed to even out, and everyone, I felt, left our garden content with what they had picked. The jars, they worked well too because it meant that our guests could cut and place their stems, you know, directly into water. Our guests, they came to us because they wanted the experience of spending time outside in a garden like this, you know, among nature and among the flowers. But I really wanted to make sure that they also left with a quality product. And the jars, that was my insurance policy. So let's talk about our setup. Setting up for our U-Pick events, it was something that was really simple. I swear we did nothing fancy. I did set up our canopy and table that we often take with us when we sell at markets. And I will say that we've gotten so much use out of this canopy and tablecloth, which I just purchased from Amazon earlier this year. Now, if you're interested, I will include links in the description box below, so be sure to check that out. But it was nice to have a spot out of the sun, you know, where guests could take a break if need be. It was also a great workspace for people. You know, some of our guests, they would cut their flowers and then come back to our shaded spot to actually arrange their flowers. After we set up the canopy, we simply set out jars for each one of the guests to grab as they entered the garden. Now, I always try to have some kind of example for people to reference when they were cutting flowers. For some people, having access to so many different varieties of flowers, it often led to overwhelm, and so just having that example out on the table, it gave them something to work off of. Now, along with the jars, we did lay out snips so that everyone could cut their flowers. Now, the snips were for our guests to use, but they were not for them to take home. And just in case anyone wanted to sit and enjoy the garden rather than walk around the entire time, we did set out some simple lawn chairs as well. But that's really our setup in a nutshell. Like I said, it was nothing fancy, but it did work for us, and I think that it still looked professional. So let's talk about the garden itself. As for our garden, there were a few things we did specifically within the garden this year to be better equipped to be a U-Pick farm. The biggest difference for us was that we took the time to lay landscape fabric in all of our walkways this season. For the last couple of years, our garden has always been what I like to refer to as a working garden. Because we use plastic mulch in the annual field, you know, our flower rows have always been weed-free or pretty close to weed-free. But prior to this year, I never went through the hassle of laying weed barrier in our pathways. They were always just bare dirt pathways. And early in the season, I could keep up with the weeds just fine with a little time behind the hoe. But it never failed that once the garden was in full bloom, I often gave up on trying to keep our pathways free of weeds. There was just too much to do. And while the weeds, while they didn't look pretty, they really didn't affect the flowers. And so I would always, let the weeds just kind of do their thing because it was just me working here. It didn't have to look pretty for anybody else. But once I realized that we'd have guests, not only looking at our garden, but also walking through our garden, I did decide to lay landscape fabric in all of our aisles. And it has worked out so well this season. While it was a lot of work initially to lay that added fabric, it has reduced our workload so much this season that I do plan on repeating this process next year. Something else we did this year was focus more heavily on planting flower varieties that are true come and cut again type flowers. We planted 3 full 120-foot rows of just zinnias alone, and that really helped keep up our production of our garden so that we could have people cutting in here all season long. We've had a good long season of U-pick events simply because our garden hasn't slowed down. Besides zinnias, we have also planted plenty of cosmos and marigolds and even celosia. If there's one thing that we planted just a little bit less of, it was definitely foliage and greenery. When we were planting our flower garden, I just had this feeling that greenery wouldn't be as popular with our U-pick guests, and that has proven to be true. Our U-pickers, well, they have tended to gravitate toward the more colorful flowers, and while some do enjoy throwing a pop of green into their jars, overall there was just less greenery picked as compared to the bright, colorful flowers. So how did our first season as a U-pick flower farm go? Honestly, our U-pick flowers has gone surprisingly well for us. I mean it when I say that we have been blessed to have truly some of the best people show up and pick flowers this year. Everyone has been so respectful of our flowers, and knock on wood, we haven't had any bad experiences where people walked over our flower rows or cut too deep. Those fears that I initially had about our garden being destroyed by visitors, for us, those turned out to be unfounded. And I think in part it's because we've had such a great community on social media. So of course, everyone that came to our farm, they really felt more like friends than anything else. What I've really enjoyed about our U-pick events is that it's allowed us to offer our customers an experience rather than just a product like a bouquet of flowers. And I think it has allowed us to connect with our customers on an even deeper level. We get to chat with our visitors once they come here about who we are and tell them a bit more about what we do as a small business. And it's helped create excitement around some of our other seasons. So many of our visitors have said that they'll be back for our fall and winter seasons, which is always great news and things that you like to hear as a small business owner. From a labor perspective, the U-pick events has helped minimize our labor during the summer months. While we do spend a bit more time maintaining the garden so that it looks pretty for visitors, the biggest difference this year has been in the amount of time that I spend creating bouquets. If you think about each U-pick ticket as the equivalent as one of our market bouquets, in a 2-hour window, I can serve 15 to 20 people and bring in the same amount of revenue as I could selling 20 bouquets, which would obviously take me more time because I'd have to cut and condition and then arrange all of those flowers. Now, speaking of bouquets, I do feel as though allowing U-pickers, ironically, has increased the number of bouquet requests that we do receive. We provide people with this great experience, and now I feel like for some of them that we're top of mind when it comes to flowers. And so when they need a bouquet for a special event or for really no reason at all, they're more likely to reach out to us. And in that sense, it's great because we're not having to do work, trying to convert new customers to buy our products. And so having those U-pick events has been great for business overall. Now, even with our great experience this year operating as a U-pick farm, there are still some things that we will likely change next year. And I'll mention just a few of those things here. For starters, we're planting less next year. Yes, you heard that right. By the end of the season, our flower rows were really overgrown, and despite our best efforts to keep everything corralled and contained, our pathways, they really just became too narrow. Now, no one has complained about that, but I do think that we'd be better off planting one less row in our flower field so that we can have slightly wider pathways. Now, another thing that we'll likely do next year is we'll start advertising dates earlier. We didn't start selling tickets until 1 week before our first U-pick event opened. In part, that was just because I wanted to make sure that we would have flowers. But I think it would serve us better to start getting people signed up for our events much sooner. I mean, just a minor tweak that we'd like to address as we get more experienced offering you pick events. Okay, so I think that about covers it, but I'm sure there's still something that I'm missing. If you have more questions about our You Pick events, I encourage you to leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them there. Now, if you've enjoyed the content in this video, could you help us out and give this video, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already. Let me just say thank you so much for tuning in today. We really do appreciate it. I've had fun hanging out with you all today, and as always, I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye guys.